It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Before we get into the questions, thanks to the channel sponsor Nogi, BJJGear.com. Check them out for shorts, spats, rash guards, and other training equipment. Use my code RAMSEY10 for a 10% discount off. Everything helps this channel out a lot. Now, on to the questions. First question from an anonymous troll on the internet. Dude, is that your real voice? Yes. Next question. Black Tiger Martial Arts says this. Anti-grappling for strikers. I'm not looking to become a grappling expert, but just enough to defend against being taken down, etc. What do you recommend? This is a big concern for a lot of traditional martial artists who come from the striking arts, and they don't want to be taken down, and they don't want to invest their whole lives into becoming a jiu-jitsu expert or a wrestling expert. So what do you do? Well, the fact of the matter is, in order to become proficient at defending a specific technique, you must understand that technique. Now, you don't need to become a world-class wrestler, but you do need to learn how to wrestle. How do you defend takedowns? You learn those takedowns. You understand those takedowns. If you don't understand how you are being attacked, you don't understand how to defend that attack. So learn how to wrestle. Wrestling is difficult, but it's simple. It is a simple art of position. And again, simple doesn't mean easy. Get some friends. If you don't have access to a wrestling class or a wrestling coach, get some friends together and follow the simple rules of wrestling. Try to pin the other guy on his shoulders. And if you are the other guy, don't get pinned on the shoulders and fight tooth and nail to get back up and impose your will. And as you do that, you're going to learn a lot of things about defending takedowns. Now, try this out with people of different skill levels. If you have access to some folks who wrestled in high school or college, pick their brains, get on the mat with them. Put in some quality mat time, learning to stuff some takedowns, learning how to get back up when you're on your back, when you're pinned. These are valuable skills that all serious martial artists need. It's weird that we divorce the various aspects of fighting, one from another, when we codify martial arts like that. I understand martial arts specialize in very specific things. In this martial art, we specialize in striking. In this martial art, we specialize in throwing people on the mat, etc. But it is weird that we allow ourselves to be limited to just that specialty. So, if your goal is to win fights, if your goal is to defend yourself, if your goal is to evade those pesky wrestlers who keep putting you on your back and you don't know what to do about it, learn how to wrestle. Next question. Our next question comes from Fraser Smith, who says, can you do a video on Pride FC versus UFC, please? Man, it's been a while since we talked about Pride. Man, it's been a while since that's been in the collective consciousness of the MMA community. Man, Pride was a fun show. It was a fun show. If you're not familiar, that was an older MMA show from Japan. Ran at the same time as the early UFCs. They had a lot of freak show fights where they had big dudes fight smaller dudes and some crazy matchups of styles. That was back in the era where fighters were still trying to figure out what MMA was supposed to be. Still trying to figure out how to strategize for the sport, how to win fights, essentially, under that rule set. Pride versus the UFC. Now, it wouldn't really be fair to compare Pride back then to the UFC today, because in some ways the metric has changed, but we could also compare Pride back then to the UFC back then, and we could have lots of arguments about what was better. I'll tell you what was better. The Pride gloves were a lot better. They had more padding over the front of the knuckles. They curved the hand a little bit, so fewer accidental eye pokes. It was just a better glove design, so I really wish that MMA gloves followed that older Pride-style glove more. That needs to come back. But yeah, the UFC definitely codified itself more and quicker than Pride did, and because of that, had staying power. I mean, the UFC was almost finished. It was almost completely, what is the word, illegalized, banned from the United States, almost completely, until the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board, that's a boxing commission, penned the rules of the UFC in an attempt to make it a legitimate sport in the eyes of the public, in the eyes of the people who were trying to shut it down. And so that is where all the crazy rules, like no 12 to 6 elbows, because that'll just make people explode into piles of thin red paste or something like that. But yeah, specifically because of those rules, because we got the rounds, because we got very specific, no freak show fights, let's have weight classes where people match up against evenly matched opponents. Because of that, it was an easier sell to the public. Because of that, we could commercialize it in the United States. I mean, they commercialize a lot of crazy stuff in Japan, a lot of really interesting, fascinating things in Japan that you would never see in the United States. You know, those Pride freak show fights being some of them. We loved him, though. We loved him. Who didn't love seeing Hongman Choi get armbarred by Fedor Emelianenko back in the day? Or guys like Shinya Aoki do flying arm bars and flying go-go platas and things like that. Man, it was a fun show. But again, comparing fighters of yesteryear to fighters of today, a lot of people will say, what about Fedor Emelianenko? Was he really the greatest of all time? Because surely modern fighters like, say, John Jones, Khabib, etc., have technically surpassed the last emperor, Fyodor. Perhaps, but he did something. He did something that no other fighter had ever done. In the fact that he was so dominant as a pioneer of the sport, if you will. And not just dominant as a pioneer of the sport. I mean, look back at Royce Gracie. You got to give props where the props are due. He competed against much larger men, although they were men who did not know how to grapple. In multi-person tournaments, had to win multiple fights on the same night to win that UFC title back in the day. But if you look at the techniques he employed, the techniques he knew, his technical abilities back then, you could say, his takedown sucked, his striking sucked. But he was a pioneer of the sport. But if you look at Fedor Emelianenko, I mean, that dude was as close to a complete fighter as you could have gotten in the era in which he fought. And yeah, man, if you put him against the best heavyweight competition today, let's not go there, because I think it's more important in this regard to celebrate what was, rather than fantasize about a crappy fight that would tarnish a legend, if you will. So those are my thoughts on Pride versus UFC. Next question. Our next question comes from our friend Leonardo, who says he watched my video about Conor McGregor versus Hafthor Bjornsson. What if that was a real fight? Remember when they sparred? And I hypothesized that if they really fought for real, that Thor would squash McGregor, specifically because that is a size and strength difference equivalent to me fighting my 8-year-old daughter. It just doesn't look good. And I know size and strength aren't everything in a fight, but they sure are a lot when it's that big of a difference. So, Leonardo asks, what would I think if there was a heavyweight fighter like Francis Ngannou fighting the Mountain? He says, I believe the point of my question is there such a thing as a perfect size for fighting? thank you for the attention. Keep up with the great channel. All right, Leonardo, thank you for the great question. Is there such a thing as a perfect size for fighting? Well, as far as competitive fighting, there are weight classes. So there is a more ideal size for a specific weight class, but then again, there are a bunch of guys out there who screw those numbers up by being exceptionally good without even cutting weight. But generally in a fight, you're going to fight someone in your own weight class, and you're going to fight someone in your own weight class for a reason. Because that is where we have an evenly matched fight. Conor McGregor is a really exciting fighter when you match him up against a guy who is close in size and close in skill to him. And then we see fireworks. Then we see a fantastic, entertaining fight. If you put McGregor up against a guy like Francis Ngannou, on the other hand, I don't like McGregor's chances in that fight either, because then you have a big guy who actually knows how to fight against a little guy who also knows how to fight. And when both guys know how to fight and know how to fight well, and there's a big size difference, most of the time the bigger guy is going to impose his will. Now, there are plenty of exceptions. If you just look up on YouTube terms like David versus Goliath fight, you'll find lots of examples of David beating Goliath. It's a funny story in the Bible. David versus Goliath. We tend to think of David as the underdog. He brought a projectile weapon into a fight against a giant with melee weapons. And Goliath says, "Come over here, that I may feed your flesh to the fowls of the air. Get over here," basically. And David's like, I'm good over here with my sling and my stones. I'm going to kill you from a distance, because I have a physical advantage from right here, not over there. So David really wasn't the underdog in that story, if you stop and think about it. But we love the idea of David versus Goliath fights, don't we? They're exciting, especially if you are a small guy who gets pushed around by bigger guys, and you fantasize about being the David beating the Goliath, if you will. You fantasize about putting yourself in the shoes of Conor McGregor beating the mountain with your superior technique, trumping over his physical gifts of size and strength, because that makes us feel good. It makes us feel special for once in this bleak universe where the concept of special seems to evade us. Is there a perfect size for fighting? Now, if Ngannou fought Thor, he'd have a much better chance than McGregor. There's still a pretty big size difference. I mean, Thor is still like twice the size of Francis Ngannou. He's big, man. I don't think most people understand how big he is. It's one thing to see a big dude on a little screen, like Thor, and think, oh, okay, he looks pretty big. And then you meet a guy like that in person, like, man, I met Fyodor Emelianenko in person, and I'd read his stats, and what is he, like 6'1", 6'2", something like that? That's like an inch taller than me, and 200-something pounds. Doesn't sound that big, but when I saw him in person standing next to me, I thought this guy is kind of a giant human being. He's much, much larger than I pictured him in my head. So, man, standing next to a giant strongman competitor like Thor, man, a guy with that much mass on him, it's a whole different thing. The screen belies his size, and that makes a big difference. So, again, Francis would definitely have a much, much better chance than McGregor winning that fight. You know, I would say a significant number of times out of 10, Francis could win by technical merit. But there's still that possibility that he's getting squashed simply because size and strength do really matter that much in a fight. But if we're talking about open weight fights, right? Open weight. There's no weight limit. Is there a threshold where if you cross that, it becomes detrimental to your performance? Well, man, it depends on what that size consists of, right? Because if you are 500 pounds of blubber, that's not going to carry over so well into athletic performance. If you are a big, strong man and you train to move athletically in the ways that are conducive to fighting, then you'll be a dangerous fighter. If you are a big, strong man who trains specifically to lift a giant rock one time, you're probably not going to have very good muscular endurance. So, it's not just about how big you are, it's about what you do with that weight. What that weight is comprised of. The body adapts to the demands we put on it. It does. Traditionally, for many, many years, even now, combat sports coaches, boxing coaches, martial artists have poo-pooed weightlifting because they look at big, strong guys, they look at bodybuilders specifically, and they say, well, those bodybuilders aren't fast. They're not nearly as fast as boxers. They're not as explosive as boxers. And they don't have the muscle endurance of a boxer. Therefore, you shouldn't lift weights because they lift weights. And that's some logical fallacies at work right there that we need to bury, and bury quickly. So one of these things is not like the other. You can be very muscular. You can have muscle striations popping out, and you can be a phenomenal athlete with phenomenal performance that carries over directly to fighting. I mean, there are many professional fighters who fit this bill, man. Many of them. Man, I'm trying to remember the name of this dude. Fights for 1FC. Very large man. Looks like a bodybuilder. I think his name is Alain, something like that. I think it's a French name. But this dude is incredibly gifted athletically. He looks like a bodybuilder. He looks like an action figure. Man, I'm kicking myself because I'm trying to remember his name. Some of you might know his name. Anyway, fights for 1FC. He's got incredible flexibility. He can do all kinds of crazy gymnastics, tumbling, movement, calisthenics movement, high kicks, spinning kicks. Dude can grapple, dude can box, dude can do all kinds of crazy stuff that we generally don't see from people with these aesthetic physiques. Why? Because most of the time when we see a guy with a aesthetic physique, he dedicates most of his training time to developing the look, the aesthetic of his physique and nothing else. But when you have a guy who lifts the weights and he does the rest of the work conducive to fighting, guess what? He's a good fighter, plus he's very strong. And that's a big advantage. So, is there an ideal size? No, but bigger, functionally bigger, is better. Bigger, dysfunctionally, not as much. Next question. Our next question comes from Mika, who started a kickboxing class, but, like many folks out there in the world, his class was discontinued because of the COVID-19 pandemic, so he's training at home mostly on the heavy bag. He misses sparring, misses drilling. Some of his friends are interested in training with him, but he's got this conundrum. He feels like he wants to help his friends, wants to coach them and teach them what he knows, do some bag work, maybe do some drills and some sparring, but he feels like he's not necessarily qualified because he's only been training for about 3 years, he says. So, is 2 to 3 years of experience enough? What I want to know, he says, is if it's a good idea to teach or coach when I'm not a technical expert and don't have any competitive experience. Well, Mika, you're not out there opening up a McDojo asking people to pay you under the pretense that you're an expert. These are your friends. They know what your training is. They know who you are. And they're asking to come and work out with you. Right? You've been training for a couple of years. No, you're not an expert, but you know a few things. You can definitely lead your friends in some exercises, some drills, some heavy bag work. Give them an introduction to sparring as long as you understand how to control yourself and teach them to control themselves so nobody dies. Nothing wrong with that, man. Nothing wrong with that. Folks all over the world have been doing backyard sparring, if they are fortunate enough to have a backyard boxing, and so on, with their friends since backyards and boxing have been a thing. I say that with a misty look in my eyes because I don't have a backyard. I live in an apartment in a concrete jungle called Shanghai, China. No backyard. I remember having a backyard as a child. That was nice, man. That was nice. If you have a backyard, take advantage. If you have a garage, take advantage. If you have a basement, take advantage. If you have a space where you can invite your friends over to train with you, even if you are not a great expert in the field, take advantage and get out there and train. Next. This next question comes from Not a Good Grappler, a friend of ours from Germany. He says he went to a Taekwondo McDojo for almost half a year. He says they didn't spar there, but he was able to beat 3 black belts at the same time. If you didn't spar, I don't know how that happened, but I'll take your word for it. He says, I was 12 at the time, and I have trained martial arts for 6 years. So you've been training since age 6. Interesting, okay. After the instructor wanted to teach us grappling, I was even able to do a flying armbar on him, after which I left the dojo. Huh. Well, yeah, if they're trying to teach you grappling at a Taekwondo school instead of teaching you Taekwondo, that's kind of a problem. That would be like going to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class, and instead of them teaching you Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they taught you fencing. Not teaching you what is advertised is kind of strange, but it does happen from time to time. I am kind of curious what your parameters for a McDojo are. Because that means different things to different people. Generally, when people say McDojo, what they mean is it's a bad martial arts school. But why is it a bad martial art school? If you look at, say, Rob from McDojo Life, he's got these rules, a few simple rules for what makes a McDojo, and I like them. 1, no pedophiles, and the rest of the rules have to do with honesty. For example, are you lying about your rank or your record, your accomplishments? Are you lying about your training? Are you giving the people what they pay for? For example, if I pay for a year of classes and I don't give you, and you don't get the year of classes, that's not an honest interaction. That's a McDojo. And that's quite a bit different than the way that term is generally used. I made a video about McDojos called something like McDojos, how to recognize them, what to do about them, maybe 4 years ago, and it's not one of my favorite videos, but it gets a lot of views. In fact, I would recant a lot of things that I said in that one. What makes it a McDojo? Is it because you felt like you weren't learning enough? Is it because you had more athletic talent than the coaches there? Or is it because they were a bunch of dishonest bums who were trying to bamboozle you? In any case, I'll take your word for it that it was not a good martial arts school. Now the question is, should I have been doing more? I'm still thinking that I should have shown the other students that we are learning nothing about fighting. The instructor even told us that spinning kicks are the best self-defense techniques. Should I have been doing more to warn the others as opposed to just get out myself while the getting was good? Well, man, that depends. That depends on what you're warning people about. Are you warning people that it's simply a low-quality martial arts school and they're not going to be able to learn how to fight well or fight efficiently? Well, as long as you tell the truth, that's fine, man. That's totally fine. If you want to tell people, if you go to this school, you are not going to learn to intelligently defend yourself, you are not going to be able to learn how to fight, I had a bad experience there, this is what it was. Okay, that's an honest assessment. If you tell the public that gym is full of a bunch of pedophiles, and it's not, that's a different situation. Now, if this gym is filled with a bunch of sexual predators, then by all means, inform the public, inform the police, get some authorities involved who can do something about that. But, just like Rob's assessment of what a McDojo is largely based on honesty. Are they honest about who they are? Make sure that your warnings about McDojos are also equally honest. Tell the truth, man. Nothing like it in the world. Next question. The next question comes from Omega DS, who says, are big muscles like a bodybuilder, a natural bodybuilder, he specifies, detrimental to boxing, kickboxing, and martial arts in general? Also, does lifting big weights make one a better fighter? Why do I feel like I already answered this question? Because I kind of did, but I remembered the name of that fighter that I was trying to remember before, that dude who fights for 1FC. I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation. Something like Alan Nganali. Alan Nganali. Something like that. Anyway, look the dude up if you don't know who that is. He's big, looks like an action figure, has muscle striations popping out of muscle striations, and the dude can move really, really well. Now, once again, there is this folk belief that if you lift weights, it's going to slow you down and all of that, and the truth of the matter is, the body will adapt to the demands you put on it. And so if the demands you put on it are simply aesthetic, what you look like, that's all your body's going to be able to do. If the demands you put on your body are get big and strong, and punch and kick fast, and sprint and jump and do all this other athletic stuff, you will be able to do all that other athletic stuff too. That's just how it works. So, yeah, go take a look at Alan Nganali. Please correct me in the comments about the pronunciation if you know how to say that guy's name. Very fascinating physical specimen. And, yeah, does lifting weights make you a better fighter? Yes, if you do it right. Especially, as I always say, squats, deadlifts, and pull-ups. Those are the most important lifts for fighters, in my opinion, specifically because the squats and the deadlifts reinforce your posture, which is probably the most important thing for fighting, grappling especially, and pull-ups increase pulling strength, and pulling strength is supremely important for striking. So, next question. Our next question comes from Christopher, who says, what constitutes bad reffing? As in being a referee. I'm pretty sympathetic to refs since I started reffing wrestling and BJJ matches. Okay, what constitutes bad reffing? Bad reffing is where a referee fails to look out for the safety of the fighters. Number one, if a referee fails to do that, he's failed at his job. Now, you also need to know the rules and enforce the rules of the sport. You need to call the fouls and all of that. So if you don't know the rules, you're not a good referee. If you don't know how to enforce the rules, you're not a good referee. But number one, above all else, look out for the safety of the fighters. If one man or woman can no longer intelligently defend themselves against their opponent, the referee needs to intervene. Now, BJJ and wrestling, it's different than mixed martial arts. Nobody's going to pounce on you and beat you with their fists and elbows while you are lying there unconscious on the floor. Hopefully not, otherwise lawsuits are going to happen in a local BJJ tournament. As far as jiu-jitsu and wrestling goes, understanding the rules, making a call and sticking to it, that's pretty important. So brush up on the rules, man, especially with BJJ. The IBJJF updates its rules constantly. Man, have you read that rule book? If you're a referee, you should be intimately familiar with the rule book. They're constantly changing all the little things, what constitutes a advantage point or a penalty point, what constitutes knee reaping, what doesn't. I mean, the IBJJF rulebook, it's like 80 pages long. That's not an exaggeration. It is about 80 pages long. So if you are an IBJJF referee, then become very fluent in the rule system. But once again, above all else, look out first and foremost for the safety of the fighters. Now, once again, with BJJ, the referee also has the distinction of being a judge as well, because the referee in BJJ, unlike the referee in many other sports, is also the man who awards the points. So, as well as enforcing the rules, you're also the guy making the calls of this guy earned 3 points for the guard pass, oh, this guy earned 4 points for the full mount position, etc. Or this guy got the advantage point for whatever reason you get advantage points for. That's constantly changing, so you constantly have to brush up on the rule set. That being said, still, first and foremost, look out for the safety of the fighters. I remember way back when, about 10 years ago, I saw this BJJ tournament, an IBJJF tournament. And there was a guy with some judo experience, and he did a hip throw and threw his opponent off the mat. His opponent face planted on concrete and was knocked out. Now, that wasn't the referee's fault. That's just something that happened. Okay? That was a crazy throw. They went off the mat and the throw happened and the dude face planted on the concrete. He got knocked out cold. Now, here's where the referee erred. This is an example of bad refereeing. The referee revived the fighter, or waited for him to wake up, and then the previously unconscious, concussed athlete, the referee pushed him back on the mat and restarted the match. At which point, this concussed, discombobulated individual got thrown again and knocked out once again. So what's wrong with that call? Now, the referee has the authority to make calls in a BJJ match to determine who's the winner and who's not. What the referee says is law. But remember what I said several times already. First and foremost, the referee's duty is to look out for the safety of the fighters. And if a guy is concussed, that needs to stop. Forget about giving him a chance to win a medal. That needs to stop. He needs medical attention. Be a good referee, study up on the rules, but more importantly, look out for the safety of those two guys on the mat in front of you. Next question. Our next question comes from a tall, skinny guy who is having trouble putting on weight, even though he trains consistently, and he's getting so upset about this he's considering taking steroids to try to bulk up. All right, here is what you need to know. In order to bulk up, it's not just about the training and the lifting, it's about the eating. First and foremost, it's about the eating. If you want to put on size, you need to eat more. You need a caloric excess. Whatever you're burning off, you need to eat more than that. And if you're having a hard time gaining weight, you need to eat a lot more than that. More than you think you need to. Man, as a tall, skinny guy myself, formerly rail thin, bone thin, the amount of eating I have done could feed a village. Man, that's the real workout, shoveling all the food into your face every 2 hours on the dot, putting yourself on an eating schedule stricter than a lifting schedule. Now, whether you take steroids or not, you still need to do the eating. Steroids don't eat for you. That's not going to give you a caloric excess that's going to allow you to grow. Anabolic steroids simply increase the amount of testosterone available in the body, which promotes muscle growth if, and only if, you have the raw materials to build muscle in the first place. So, personally, I'm not about performance-enhancing drugs. I'll leave that up to you to decide. In many areas, that's a serious crime. In some places, it is not. But I'll leave that up to you to decide. But I'm going to tell you, straight up, it's not a lack of steroids, it's not a lack of testosterone that is the reason you are not growing. It is a lack of a caloric excess. So you gotta eat more. Next. Our next question comes from our friend Mark, who says, during sparring, do you wrestle much using the big 16-ounce boxing gloves? I find it difficult to maintain a gable grip and lose single legs a lot because of it. Any advice? Yeah. If you want to get good at grappling while wearing boxing gloves, then you have to do more grappling wearing boxing gloves, which sounds kind of crazy if you haven't done it before. But when I moved to China, I started fighting Sanda fighters. I did some Sanda competitions, and Sanda is often called Chinese kickboxing, but that's really just half of the sport. Punching and kicking is really just half of the sport of Sanda. It's also wrestling. It is striking combined with wrestling, specifically throws and takedowns. There's no ground fighting. But throws and takedowns are half of the sport, and you have to do all of those throws and the takedowns with boxing gloves on. And when I first tried that, it felt impossible. It felt like trying to grab a greased pig. I just couldn't get my fingers on it, because that's what I was trying to do, get my fingers on the other guy. And that's not good grappling technique. It's not. Inside of a boxing glove, your hands are shaped like hooks. And if you think about the gable grip, that's exactly what the hands are doing anyway. You turn your hands into hooks, into these monkey grips without thumbs. We're not trying to articulate our fingers and hold things with our fingers, because finger grips are weak. We're trying to hold on with our wrists, right? So put on those boxing gloves, it automatically turns your hands into hooks. So clasp your wrists together, and then they'll start sliding up toward the fingers, right? And if your gloves are really stiff, stretch out the fingers a little bit, right? Pack them a little bit so that they're more flexible, so you can grapple a little bit better in them. But it really comes down to experience. So when I buckled down, trained at a Sanda camp over in Jiangsu province, trained at a Sanda camp up in Xi'an, trained at Sanda camps all across China with every Sanda fighter I could find, trying to figure out, how are you so dang good at grappling in boxing gloves? How do you catch those kicks in boxing gloves and throw people on their heads in boxing gloves? How do you do double leg takedowns and fireman's carries and all these other throws in boxing gloves? That just seems mind-boggling. But I learned a lot from that, which is, because of that limitation of not being able to use the fingers, it actually helped me develop better grappling technique. Because better grappling technique is not using your fingers to grapple. It's using your wrists. So practice, my friend. Practice. Next. Our last question comes from our friend Totoro. Oh, hey, it's our neighbor Totoro writing in. Okay, Totoro's kind of bummed out because, like many of you, he's stuck at home during this coronavirus pandemic and unable to train. Man, I feel it's weird, because here in China, where the pandemic started, the whole country went on into this unprecedented lockdown, quarantine, nationwide, every city. The borders were closed 100% for about 3 months. And then, freedom. The virus was almost eradicated. There's actually been one new case in Shanghai reported yesterday, so this was kind of a big deal. Some of you were like, what? That doesn't sound right, because in my country it's everywhere. Anyway, update about the coronavirus in Shanghai. Some of you have been asking. But yeah, China did a really, really, really good job of nipping it in the bud. And so, man, I have not been on lockdown. Except for those 3 months, man, between January, February, March, and mid-April. Mid-April is where the city started opening up again. But yeah, man, it's been pretty awesome being able to get out there and train again. So I wish the rest of the world could participate in that, but unfortunately, airborne illnesses are hard to control when they are highly contagious. So what do we do about that? Time will tell. Anyway, Totoro's question. He wants to know what he can do in order to train alone because his room is very small. And he says, I don't have any space to train at home. What would be the best way to stay fit and get some training going on? You don't have any space to train at home, but you have a room and you have a home. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Do you have room in your home to stand up? Do you have room in your home to sit down? Do you have room in your home to lie down on the floor? Do you have room in your home to jump up and down? That last one is optional, but very useful if you do. And if you don't, do you have room outside of your home to jump up and down? If the answer to at least 3 of those questions is yes, then you have enough room to work out. You have enough room to train. You have enough room to shadow box. You have enough room to do plyometric exercises. You have enough room to do calisthenics. You have enough room to get physically fit and train. It doesn't take a lot of space. It doesn't take a lot of equipment. It takes a lot of mental power and focus and a lot of determination and a lot of personal initiative. That's what it takes to get out there and train. It doesn't take stuff and things and money. It doesn't take anything fancy. It takes heart. It takes heart to train, just like it takes heart to win fights. Anybody feels like they can fight when they're fresh. But how long does that last? How long does that feeling last? Man, you get under those hot stage lights, they're beaming down on you. The other guy hits you right in the mouth or in the nose or in the temple and boom, you don't feel so good anymore. You don't feel so fresh anymore. You tie up in a clinch for a minute. You're carrying that other guy's weight. For even 10 seconds, he's barreling down on you like a wild animal trying to kill you, and suddenly you don't have that vim and that vinegar behind your strikes and your grappling that you did, or you thought you did, at the beginning of that match. You're not the same guy as you were when you were completely fresh stepping in. You're not the same guy that you thought you were when you signed up for that fight. But if you have heart to carry you through when you don't feel so good, when the circumstances are not ideal, guess what you can do? You can win some fights. So you don't have a big gym. You got a tiny house, you got a tiny room, you don't have a lot of space. But if you have room to stand up and sit down and lie down, you've got enough room to train. That being said, my friends, thank you for watching. Now get out there and do exactly that. Get out there and train.